Hello, my name's Daniel from CG Dreams, and today I'm going to be making this short tips and tricks video for the hair system within Cinema 4D. I'm using the studio version R17, but I don't think much has changed in the hair system in the previous few versions. Now I must note that I'm fairly new to Cinema 4D and its hair system, but I'm learning and getting around it, and I have also come across a few problems that one of which I'm going to be addressing today, which is the hair intersections. You can see from the two images here which one is more desirable, and the problem that we're going to be talking about is the hair intersection that you can see on the left image. You can clearly see that the specular is really adding to this problem. It's highlighting the problem, excuse the pun. So on the right image here that you can see rendered, you can see pretty much that issue is gone. So I'm going to be talking about how to get rid of this problem with the hair intersections. So the first thing I've done is I've undocked all of the hair features that we're going to be using, found from the simulate, and you can see here we've got them all here. So just clicking on these top bars will detach it from the menu so we can gain quick access to it. What I've done is I've created a sphere. This is what most people do as soon as they get into Cinema 4D. Create a quick sphere, put it into edit mode, select a portion of the hair where you want hair to grow from, and then click on add hair. This is not the ideal workflow that I found so far. What happens is we've got lots of guides. Obviously the more polygons that we've got in the object, the more guides are going to be created, and the more havoc the more problems it's going to give you to styling the hair. The second problem is when you want to work with particular layers, because hair does lay down in layers, it's very difficult to select those layers because they're already overlapping each other as soon as you press the play to simulate the initial drop. So that's what I've done. I've just gone through the natural thing that I think most people do as soon as they get into the hair system, and this is what gives us this nasty intersection. If I just bring up my picture viewer, you can see here from the render that we've got here with quite a few hairs, 250,000 hairs, that we've got all of these little bumps here on the specular. You can just see them, just marking these off here. There's just loads of them there. Okay, not very nice at all. We definitely don't want to see that. And when we've got shadows enabled, that becomes even more apparent. So the first thing is how do we quickly get rid of this issue? So the quick way to get rid of this issue is simply to go to the hair, and we want to make sure that we don't have too many hairs initially. I mean, we've got 250,000. I'm going to go down quite low. I'm going to go down to, say, 60,000. Okay. That's dramatically brought the head count down. What we're going to then do is we're going to go and use the cloning within Cinema 4D's hair system, so that we can make up for the hair that's lacking. You can see here, simply by dropping the amount of hairs, we've already eliminated quite a bit of the intersection, just simply because of the hair is not bunching up as much. So the next thing is to go into the hairs tab, and this is where we do have a lot of control for the actual hair render itself, and we go to the cloning. We want to set it as roots, and we don't want to have the root and the tip too far out from where the original is. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the editor, and then in the editor I'm going to select from guides to hairlines. We want to bring down the detail quite low. This is going to give us a representation of what is actually happening with the hair itself, not just seeing the guides. With that said, I can see I've got this guide here which is managing to get its way out there. I'm going to Just get this in harmony with the rest of the hair somewhat, and then we can move on. So okay, that will do. So the cloning, back to the hair object, hairs, clones. When I initially put one clone on, you'll notice here that it pretty much does a very good job of interpolating, you could say, these additional hairs that are working next to the hairs that are already in place. When we start to drive this up, what can happen is we can get the hair to not follow the style too well, and this happens because we've got the root and we've got the tip set in the centimeters quite away from the original hairs. By decreasing this, it's going to get closer to the original hairstyle, but we want to have at least some kind of distance away from the root, because this is what's going to help us get out of this problem with this intersection. So I'm going to just go, for this particular sake, the root to be at 2 centimeters. Now if you want more control, so that when you've got a very specific hairstyle, you want to use this offset for this particular cloning. Always remember that whenever you're dealing with these curves, that you're dealing with the roots to the left and the tips to the right. This means that if we were to bring down the right down to 0, that it's going to have less effect on the tips. And in this particular case, I haven't got any issue with the tips. All my real issues are really up with the roots. So if we start to increase the roots now, you can see that the tips are not really being affected. So let's go for a render now and see what we've got. Remembering that I've taken down the hair count from 250,000 down to 60,000 now. Right away we can see that we've got a much better specular highlight on the surface. If I just highlight this, the main area there, we've got this nice clean specular highlight around the surface here. And keep in mind that we've got a lot of hairs being rendered right at this particular moment in time. So we've got this nice specular highlight spot. If we go back to the previous render, where we had just 250,000 hairs, you can see we've got a lot of blotching going on, a lot of this intersection, which is what we want to get rid of. This is much better. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and add a light to the scene, just a basic light. And I'm just going to move this light let's just add a floor. And on the light itself, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to the hair tags and select light, and that enables us to set up some soft shadows, and I'm going to put it at 750 by 750 for the shadow map. And let's see what we got. We want at least normally a couple of lights in the scene, so I'm just going to duplicate that, just hold down the control key, and I've duplicated that light just so that we've got at least 2 lights in the scene there. One a bit higher and one a little bit lower. And let's just go for a render now. So I'm sure you agree it's much better to what we had in the first place. We got from that to that, and then with the shadows enabled for the area light as an area shadow, we've got this. Now there's obviously a few things we need to set up in the material because things are not right at the moment, and one of those things that I normally set up in the material is I'm going to make sure that I add at least another little knot inside there, so that I've got the tip fall off to be working kind of sloping off, falling off more closer to the tip, so we've got a little bit more thickness during the rest of the hair. That I found that to work quite well. Another thing that I've found is really essential is to set up the specular correctly. This is because it all contributes to a realistic render. There's no point just trying to deal with just one particular area, for instance just the intersection. We need to be able to work on the specular, the shadows, the lighting, so that it all contributes its own area to bring out an overall look to the hair render. This is why I'm going into a little bit of the material, not just dealing with the hair object itself. Now the best way that I found to set up the specular is to first turn off the secondary specular. And what I generally find is I like to have the sharpness quite high, in fact above 100%. And then I go for a render and then I work my way down. And I find that it's easier to work with extremes so that you can really see what's going on, what the changes are. So let's go for a quick render and then we can start to work on the secondary specular. By tightening up the specular, we find that we're able to get more of the natural colour to come through. As you can see here, this is before and this is after. So now we've got the specular to be a much more tighter and kind of the level in which I want it. It can be a personal preference, but I quite like it to have it a little bit more sharper like this. The next thing is the secondary specular. So what I first like to do is I like to have a colour for this. We've already got a primary colour for the specular, so I'll go to the texture and I select colour. And in this I like to set it to a kind of like a bronzy kind of tint to it. And that's where I would kind of have it at the end. However, before I go for this final end colour, I like to go to something quite extreme so I can really see what the secondary specular is doing. This is the way that I like to work. And it's a good idea to also turn off the primary specular so that you can evaluate them individually. But I'm just going to leave the primary specular on just so I can speed the process up a little bit. So I've just chosen an extreme colour of blue so that we can see what's happening with the secondary specular. The strength for the secondary specular we don't want as high as the primary. I'm just going to start with something about 30 and the sharpness I'm going to bring down a little bit. So there's before and there's after. You can clearly see that the secondary specular is actually having quite a wide influence over the hair. So I would start to bring up the sharpness, and then when I'm happy with that, and I'm just going to go for any value on this because I don't really want to drag this video out, then I'm going to go to the colour and then select a bronzy kind of colour. If I'm going to be going for blonde, that is the secondary colour that I would normally add to it. And then we go for a quick render. So this is before and this is afterwards, and I'm sure that you agree it looks much better when we've got the secondary specular set up like it is. It kind of merges in better with the colour, and it really does allow the primary specular to show more lighter and this kind of like tinge to come around the edges of the main specular. And if you wanted to go to more extremes, you could select even more of a deeper kind of colour, and it looks quite nice when you do this. So I find that we don't want to push it too far, but it certainly does make a big difference when we do this. I'm going to go for one more render, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few tips on the actual the main color of the hair itself, and then we're going to be looking into the other things that are going to really help get rid of the nasty intersection look, and that's going to be by using the kink and the frizz. So just for comparison, as you saw, I kind of changed the color, a little bit more stronger tint, just so you can see what effect it has on there. That's before and that's afterwards. And I'm hoping that you can see that it really does add a little bit more realism to the tint of the hair. While we're talking about the hair, there's a couple of other things that really does allow you to see the strands more individually, as you'll find that sometimes, especially when you've got many hairs in the render, that it almost looks very flat and plastic looking, even when you've got the specular set up. and this is down to the color variation. So I'm just going to go to the color, and this is the default color that we have when we add the hair material. But you can see this variation here that we can change the hue, and we can change the saturation and the main value of the hair. We want to keep these quite low, especially the hue. We don't want to have that too high. And just play around with these, because what you'll find is you'll find that this will give you some variation in the hairs, enough to give you a bit of definition that the hairs are actually hairs and not just a flat plane of color. So another thing that helps with this is the tint, and this gives a random tint. In this particular case, random as in the percentage of how much hairs is going to affect overall. So by default it's set to 10%. I'm going to go to the texture, and I'm going to select color, and I'm going to select a tinty color within the yellow range, but quite dark. You can have some reddy kind of tints in there as well if you wanted to. I like to go for a darker color, and this is just at 10%. And then I'm going to go for a render, and you see the massive difference that it makes between the way the hair was rendering before and the way that it renders after we just make those minor adjustments with the hue, the saturation and the value of the color variance and the tint color. So here is before and here is after, and I'm sure that you agree with me here that you can really start to see some individual strands standing out, and it definitely looks much better. It kind of takes away a little bit of the softness, but if you want it to look more realistic, you want to have a little bit more variation in there. So I really do recommend that you just play with these variation settings and the additional tint to the hairs, so that you can get a nice blend between the original color before and afterwards, and it definitely will break apart the hair a little bit more into its individual strands, rather than looking all bolt together, as you can see there. Now at this particular point, I just want to go back to the A-B comparison between the way the hair originally was, which is like that, and the way the hair is now, like this. Obviously there's slightly different positions and lighting, but you can see here that by default we've got a lot of intersections going on. The specular doesn't look really nice at all, and it kind of looks a bit wavery and feathery. Now this looks much more like hair, and we haven't really played with any of the other settings yet, which is what I'm going to go into right now. Now, as I mentioned right in the very beginning, this isn't really the ideal method to work with your hair layers, because you've got all of your guides laying down on top of each other from the outset. What I like to do is I like to just select a certain area. I'm just going to just go and turn off the hair for the moment there. So that's just select. Okay, this is the way that I would recommend that you work. You just select a strip of hair with just a couple of rows of polygons at a time. Add the hair, style the hair, and then copy the hair material. This is really going more into something else, so I don't want to deviate too much. I'm going to make a separate video on this at another time, but that's the best way to go about it. And then when you've done that, you can then make a new hair selection, making sure that your old hair selection tag isn't selected. We don't want to have the old hair selection tag selected, but we want to go to select and set selection. And what this will do is it will create a brand new tag, and you can drag this tag into the new hair material. Once you've done that, you would just go to the new hair material, go to your guides, and in the growth here, I believe it's in the growth or the editing. No, it's in the editing. You would click on reroute, and it would reroute based upon the new hair tag that you've selected. But I'm going to make a separate video on that on another time. I really don't want to deviate, but that's the best way to go about it. So getting back to what we were doing with the hair that we've got at the moment, there's a couple of other things that I found quite helpful to get rid of this intersection, this nasty bumpy looking hair. and that is to use the push tool. The push tool is really handy, and it can be found amongst the brush. You select the brush. No, it's not that one in particular. This is the one, the push tool. Now the push tool is very handy. What it will do is enable you to really bring out a nice curvature from the root of the curve. And at the moment it's not too bad. The segments are very low. If you had your segments much higher and you had this, let's just select one of these, shall we? We'll do a live selection, and just so I can demonstrate this, make sure we're in guides. I'll select this one guide here. If I can, just that one guide. I'm just going to go to my guides. I'm going to bring up the segments. Just a little bit so I can demonstrate this. And with the push tool, I'm going to increase the distance. Okay, and turn guides on and just click apply. Now this tool becomes live, and I want the roots to be affected, so I just lift this up, and I want the tips to have less effect. If not, no effect at all. And then that's just bring this distance down. Okay, so it could be that your hair is really flat against the surface of the mesh, and by increasing this distance it will pull it out. And what you can do is you can create another knot. I'm just holding down the control key, and you can create a little bit of a curvature. You can see right there, right where the tip is, and this can really help you set the hair away from the initial hair geometry, especially if you started off with the hair really falling close to there. So this is one way that you can really pull this out. And then of course if you just deselect and then apply this with nothing selected, it's going to apply this to all of the hair roots. It may take a little bit of time if you've got lots of roots there, but you'll find that it will actually put it away from the surface of the hair. So if you're working particularly with layers of hair, which is what I recommend you use this for, you can make sure that the topmost layer is pulling away from the other layers underneath it, so that you don't get this intersection. This enables you to set this so you've got this hair just pulling and pushing away from the rest of the hairs, especially when it comes to the hair strands as well. And it will definitely make a big difference in the way that the hairs come out and intersect with other hairs, because the guides are really going to be pulling away from that because of this curve that we're setting at the root. Now onto the hair material again. I want to have a little bit of frizz with the hair. You'll never find that the hair is perfect as far as being totally straight with no frizz at all. Even with the most finest of hairstyles, you normally have some kind of frizz, and turning on the frizz here will really help this. Initially you'll find that the frizz is going all over the place, but we can control this with this curve here. So by bringing the curve up, we're going to be affecting more the root, and then by bringing it down we're going to have less effect on the tip. And of course we can really have a nice fall off with this, so that it really is pulling the hair away from the root without affecting too much of the hairstyle towards the tip. And this is something that really will make a difference. And of course we can work with the percentage here with the scales, the X and the Y. So I'm just going to bring these down. The variation I want to take down to 0 in this particular case, and let's just have a look. Take this frizz down, and again, as I said before, I like to work with my layers separately, because this really will make a massive difference when it comes to the end results. You can have a hair layer just particularly for frizz so that you don't affect the rest of the hairstyle. In this particular case, it's still going to have effect on the overall hairstyle, but there's nothing wrong with adding a little bit of frizz anyway. Do exactly the same for the kink as well, and I always advise that whenever you're working on a particular part of the hair system here for the materials, is that you turn one off and turn the other on, so you really can see what is going on and what is affecting what. So again, same sort of thing. I like to kind of choose what's happening with where it's been affected. So for instance, I just want the tips to be affected, and I really don't want the root to be affected. And I'm just going to bring it down a very low value just to give us a bit of variation there. Put back on the frizz, and it's going to give us something looking a little bit more realistic. Finally, when I come to this particular point, I like to turn off the frizz, the kink, and then turn on the clump. And I'm not going to go for the clump, but go for the manual. It really does make a massive difference in you turning on include roots and increasing this limit. This is the limit to the overall hair that you've got on there, and it really will make a difference. And I'm going to bring this clumping right up. Again, I found that you generally want the kind of count quite low, and the radius is really going to make a big difference as to how the hair clumps. Now, if you start to work on the clumps when it comes to the overall hairstyle like this, then it can kind of work, but you haven't got much control. But I advise you that you use different hair layers, and it really will make a big difference in this. In this particular case, I don't want too much clumping going on with the main roots, but I do want it to happen to the tips. And you can select how many hair limits it's going to be. I'm not going to play with this too much. And with this value is set to very low, 0.3. Okay, I'm just going to go with this, and we're just going to go for a quick render. We're just going to look at the roots to see what we've got from this. And by the time I normally finish at this particular point, I would normally go back to the hair, and I would increase the hairs a little bit there. I've gone from 60,000, that's to say we go to 70,000. And as you do this, always remember that if you've got your hair visibly seen in the editor, that you want to bring these hairlines down very low as you bring the hair count up. Otherwise, you're going to get some pausing, freezing, even crashing if your system can't handle it. And back to there again. I'm going to go for a clone of 3 and then go for a render. So really that pretty much covers it, and I really did throw the worst case scenario into account. This is where basically we've got this horrible overlapping that is occurring in the original one. Looks as though I've deleted it actually. But you can see here we've gone through several phases here. That's got us right the way down to this here, where we've got the hair looking a lot more better. But as I mentioned, I would really advise you to work in layers rather than like this, because it really will make a huge difference as to the way that the hair is going to flow and look. This isn't the way I would normally work, but it certainly will help with the roots not intersecting so badly with each other. And just to finish off on this, I just wanted to touch a little bit about what I was mentioning a few times during the video, and that is about layering. In this particular hair test, you can see here that I just applied one single layer, and this layer I've put as the base layer, layer 1. You can also see that I've set up the specular to have that two-tone specular, where you've got the white hot spot on there, and then you've got this nice tint of a yellow tint over the top. You can also see within the hair material that I've set the variation up for the colour. So this gives us this particular look. The second layer is the clumps. So I would like to set up just a few areas of clumps to come out from the main hair. The third layer would be the frizz. So this would be a layer of hair that is quite frizzed on the edges. And then finally we can see what the difference is when we see them all together. And I'm sure you'll agree that when you've got all of these layers together, this is really when you're going to get the hair to look much more realistic. When you have the base layer, the clumps, and then the frizz layers all controlled separately and overlapping. And the reason why we haven't got any of the issues here with the intersections is because I used the methods that I showed you in this video today, which is to use the push tool to really push out each layer to be either above it or below it. Also used the method of using the clones for hairs, so there was less original hairs set in there, but I used clones to thicken up the hairstyle with the offsets of the root and tip. And this really gives an overall nice clean look, but at the same time realistic. Now, I'm not professing to be an expert in this area because using a hair system such as this is quite new to me, so I'm learning it, and I'm going to be getting better at it as time goes on. So check back, because I'm sure I'm going to be posting more future videos where I'm going to refine what I've showed you today, and even maybe go back on some of the things that I showed you today where I've found better methods. But for now, I'm sure that it should help somebody get off to a good start within Cinema 4D for the hair system, and to get some decent results. So thanks for watching, and bye for now.